Hello, welcome back to biology. We're continuing on with day 77, last part of circulatory and respiratory system. So let's move into the respiratory system here. So here you can see the different parts of the respiratory system. So kind of starting at your face down, we've got the nose, then our mouth. That airway passage continues into our pharynx. And then down below that, we've got our larynx. That continues. The larynx is your voice box. You can kind of feel that in your throat in there. Just down from that is our trachea. So that's kind of the tube that goes down through your throat and your neck down into your chest, and then branches into what we call the bronchi, the right and left branches. So the right bronchi is on your right side, the left bronchi is on your left side. And then that kind of splits across those two things. And then those bronchi get smaller and smaller and smaller into what we call bronchioles. And then finally the last little bit is what we call the alveoli. Those are the little balloons from the Hemo movie there. So, so if we look at the function of the respiratory system, it's really all designed about moving volumes of air in and out of our lungs. Ultimately, what we want to do is take in oxygen through our lungs and release carbon dioxide out of our lungs. But in order to move that air in and out of our lungs, they kind of operate like a bellows do. So we've got this large muscle that kind of goes across the bottom of our rib cage called the diaphragm. And that diaphragm either contracts and pulls down or relaxes and goes up. And as it does so, it changes the volume of the space around the lungs. Lungs themselves don't actually have any muscle tissue in them, so they can't actually change shape on their own. But by pulling this diaphragm down, it creates this big open space here, and then air is going to rush in to fill those lungs so you don't end up with a negative pressure there. And then as that diaphragm relaxes and goes back up, it's going to squeeze those lungs and force air back out. So the diaphragm is what's ultimately responsible for us breathing. You have some muscles in between your ribs, so you can kind of expand and contract your chest a little bit, but the diaphragm is kind of the bigger part of it. And ultimately, that air is going to move in and out and inflate and deflate. Those are the alveoli in the alveolar sac right there. All right, so in order to keep your lungs healthy, the air we breathe must be filtered because there's all kinds of stuff in the air around us. So we have to filter it, moisten it, and warm that air up. And so the passageways starting from the nose on through do that for us. So we begin with our nose. We've got hair and mucus that helps filter things out. Mucus moistens it, the sinuses warm it up. And there's a dog nose here. But if you look on this side, so this is kind of going into the nose. We've got kind of these different shapes here that kind of cause the air to swirl around as it passes through. And then ultimately it's going to go down the back of your nasal passage down into your throat here. So you may have heard of people having something called post-nasal drip. So that's where you've got mucus that kind of goes down the back of your nasal passage into your throat, or prenasal drip would be like if you've got a runny nose stuff coming out here. And then uvula is the little dangly bit in the back of your throat there. So that's what's going to join up in between there. Continuing into our throat, we've got three different regions. Our pharynx, which is kind of right behind our mouth, behind our nose there. Our larynx, as we mentioned, that's kind of your voice box. And then the trachea going down there. And all three of those have functions. So the larynx has vocal cords, it has something called the epiglottis, which is what seals off your throat when you eat or drink, so you don't get food or water down into your lungs. And then the trachea have cilia and mucus that again is continuing to filter and remove stuff from the air particles. The trachea comes down into here, and then we talked about it branching. So branches and branches and branches. So bronchi to bronchioles to alveolar sacs composed of alveoli, and this is where the actual exchange of gas happens, is at the level of the alveoli. All right. So go ahead and take a moment. You can pause the video if you want. See if you can name the different parts that are on there. Kind of going from the front all the way through. All right, I'm going to continue past this. All right, so here we are inside the alveoli. So you can see those happening there. Again, the big thing is oxygen in, carbon dioxide out. So this is actually a pulmonary arteriole coming in, going to the capillary beds that are wrapped around the alveoli. So this is going away from the heart to the lungs, and it's blue because it's deoxygenated blood. It hasn't picked up the oxygen yet, and then it's going to pick up the oxygen to this capillary bed. And so here we've got an alveoli with air coming in, the carbon dioxide gets dumped out, the oxygen travels in. It has to do with something called partial pressure. There's more carbon dioxide in the blood than there is in this space here, so it goes from high concentration to low concentration. Oxygen works the opposite way, so we've got a relatively high concentration of oxygen in this space, relatively low concentration in the oxygen in the blood, so oxygen is going to go from here to here. It's just diffusion, simple diffusion across that thin layer of the capillary in the alveoli. And you can see just how thin that is by looking at these images over here. So this is just kind of the spaces with the bronchi and then the alveolus, and these kind of open spaces in between there. Get oxygen in, CO2 out. All right, so this is just an animation showing if you follow kind of the blue star is oxygen, the red kind of black three-pointed star is carbon dioxide. So here we've got oxygen coming in to the bronchioles, right? And then here we've got a red blood cell coming in, it's carrying carbon dioxide, drops off the CO2, right? And then the red blood cell we follow it is going to pick up the oxygen, picks up the oxygen, and there it goes with the oxygen going away. So you can see that kind of happening over and over and over again. And this cycle basically repeats. So here's in our lung, right? Oxygen in, CO2 out, and then it's going to go around to whatever body tissue we've got. Oxygen will get dropped off into our body tissue, and CO2 will get picked up, and then it's going to travel back around to our lungs where the cycle repeats. All right, so that kind of concludes the material for today. So again, we've got our objectives on the screen. You can pause and look at those. We've got our key terms. Pause, see if you can define a few of those key terms on there. And then next class will be digestive and excretory systems, so make sure that you pay attention when we get to that part. And then, as before, there are some kind of questions you can go through and you can answer those questions on there and see how you do. I'm going to leave this off with that slide, and thank you once again for tuning in. All right, we'll check in with you next time. So long.